really want to get your comments. Make sure if you don't get a chance to ask a question or make a comment, that you take a comment form and return it to us. Make sure that you look at the boards, and you can have an opportunity to fill out a comment on each one of the sets of boards. We're thankful that you're here, and we're excited to share with you the recommendations for the study. So I'm going to probably, I think, first turn it over to Amy Inman, who's the project director. Amy's going to give a quick introduction.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Good evening, everyone. This is it's a treat to come here. As Tim mentioned, we're almost a year and a day from when we began this study. And we've done a lot of work, and this is actually our third round of public meetings that we've held for the Route 1 multimodal alternatives analysis. And so we do appreciate all the involvement that you all have given to this project. As Tim mentioned, I'm Amy Inman with the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, and we have been leading this study in close coordination with Fairfax County and Prince William County, as well as the local, state, and state elected officials. So we've really been hard at work. And before we get too far in, I'd like to go ahead and introduce a few folks and let some of our elected officials say a few words before we go through our presentation. First, I'll introduce everyone, and then we'll come back. We have Senator Toddy Puller, Delegate Scott Servell, Delegate Sickles, Supervisor McKay, Jeff McKay. We also have Chris Landgraf from the Fort Belvoir. Thank you, Chris, for coming. And Allison Davis from WMATA. And we have Tom Burke from Fairfax County. There's Tom. We have Leonard Wolfenstein as well. There's Leonard back here. They're with Fairfax County. And then we have Jason Mumford, who's with AECOM. He's our project manager. Meredith Judy is with Roadside and Harwell. We have several other consultants in the room. Thank you for being here. And of course, we have several of the staff members that are with their elected officials. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Senator Puller so she can say a few words.
Thank you very much, Amy. This has been an exciting endeavor, and I think it is the last study on Route 1 that I will ever have to put into the legislature. Although we haven't yet gotten a second phase of this funded, so that's for the next session. But I did a centerline study. I think I put it in after I'd been 2 years in the legislature. So we have that study took till about 1998, and we do have a footprint for the whatever expansion or widening of Route 1 we do. We will use that footprint so that it will be consistent down the length of Route 1. And the money that that Jim Moran got us, $180 million to widen Route 1 through Fort Belvoir, is going to use that footprint. And it will be nice to have the road stay the same number of lanes all the way down instead of having to go back in and back out. So, and hopefully his part will be for 3 miles, and then your state delegation here is going to have to go down and work on the governor to try to get some more money in the budget. Also, one of the goals of this particular study is to get federal funding, because you have to have a transit study with the centerline study in order to get federal funding. And I was told by the people at DRPT that this was the route to go, so we will hopefully get that done. We have to get the backing of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors and the backing of the Prince William County Supervisors also. So we still have some work to do, and so does DRPT, but it is moving in the right direction, and I look forward to us all being able to move about our community in a more comprehensive way and without as much traffic as we've had. So I thank you all for coming. We have a nice crowd, and I know most of you, so that's great. Thank you very much. I look forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Senator Fuller. Thank you. And now, turn it over to Delegate Scott Smith.
I too want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Mount Vernon community always has a lot of people who want to come to these kinds of meetings, and I appreciate you all taking an interest in how our community is going to look for the next 10, 15, 20 years. That's exactly what this is about. You know, when I was first elected by you all in 2009, one of the very first things I did was I went to VDOT and I said, what do I got to do to get Route 1 fixed? And they said, you need to have one of these studies done so that if we incorporate transit into Route 1, we can justify the funding, because this is a federal, US 1's a federal highway. Federal Highway Administration requires you to do this kind of study in order to take the next step. Went to Toddy and I both put in budget amendments, and Toddy was able to get funding for this, slipped into the Senate side, I think in the 2011 session, maybe the 2012 session, and here we are today, almost at the end product. And so, to me, this is very exciting. You know, this is not just about what the road looks like, it's not just about, you know, what kind of transit we have, but it's about our quality of life, it's about our schools, it's about jobs, it's about where we shop, where we eat, it's about our property values, it's about how our community looks. It's not just about roads. And so this to me is very exciting. I think what they've recommended is very exciting. I'm not very happy about the time frame, but I am very happy about what it is they're recommending. I think a two-stop yellow line extension would be tremendous for our community in terms of bringing redevelopment, in terms of helping with traffic, and in terms of helping with stormwater, in terms of helping make our community the kind of place that people want to live for the next 50 years. And so I'm very excited about it, and I want to speed all this up. So I appreciate you all coming out tonight. I'm looking forward to hearing your input, and thank you for your interest.
Thank you. And next, we'll turn it over to Delegate Sickles.
Thank you. I'm Mark Sickles in the 43rd Delegate District, which starts at Huntington and ends at the place where everybody gets stopped when they're coming home, at the corner where the new Walmart is. And then it starts up again down in the middle of Fort Belvoir. So I have a lot of constituents that come through this corridor, and I am anxious to make improvements as well, as Scott is. It's our job to help push this thing. I do want to thank everyone involved in this. It's been so professionally done. We've had great consultants working with DRPT to make this happen. I think that even though it is slow, when you see the time frame to Metro, there's going to be a way to help build, if we can do this. And it's not a slam dunk that we can do this. We passed a transportation bill last year that was the largest tax increase in Virginia history. And that's going to be the money that helps us buy this land and go through the long process of doing this. I want to help speed it up. I want to do as much as we can to help speed it up. It's the ultimate state, local, and federal project. All three levels of government have to work together. Not any one of them can do it on their own. And so I look forward to listening to the community. As Scott said, will be huge changes to the community to bring the ultimate in transportation service. Our community will change a lot, and you will see that in these slides if you haven't seen it already. And so we need to bring the community together with us, and maybe that's a good transition to Jeff. I see Jeff standing back there, because a lot of this is going to, when we're done with this, the Board of Supervisors is going to have to put together the team to try to start out and make this happen. So here you go, Jeff. Jeff McKay.
Perfect transition, Mark. Well, I too want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Many of you I know, because I grew up on the Route 1 corridors where I spent my life, and unfortunately a lot of things haven't changed on Route 1 over that period of time the way they should. And Senator Puller said, rightly so, that this study hopefully is the last one we see, but equally important, it has to be the first one that we fully implement. I've got a lot of studies in my office that were done before my time. They collect a lot of dust, and they were a waste of taxpayer resources. We've got to make sure this study gets implemented. And the onus is on all of us to make sure that that happens. And to that point, Delegate Sickles mentioned the new state transportation funding. That funding that largely NVTA controls, which is a different body, asks our Board of Supervisors every year for what our highest priorities are to fund in Fairfax County. And you all know how big Fairfax County is, and you know how many road needs and transit needs and transportation needs that we have. Yet our board, when we put our prioritized list together for the first time ever this year, Supervisor Highland and I were able to get Route 1 as one of those priority projects that we need funding for. It has all the ingredients that are necessary. It has all the ingredients that are necessary to NVTA. It's regionally significant. There's a national security interest. It can spur economic development. There are significant safety issues that exist on the highway today with pedestrian safety and vehicle safety. And you've noticed we as the county have put a lot of money into the highway lately, connecting sidewalks, putting in pedestrian countdown signals, a lot of the little stuff that you don't notice as frequently as a major road project like the one the federal government is doing near Fort Belvoir. But all of these pieces are important, and it just shows you how out of date our infrastructure is on Route 1, that we're putting in these little sideways sidewalk segments here, there, everywhere to try to come up with a system for pedestrians on Route 1 to use. And so I'm excited by this study. I think the most important thing this study does is it sets a course for us for some short-term investments and a long-term strategy to get rail down Route 1. And the reason that is so important is we can't wait 15 or 20 years for the perfect to start accumulating funding. We have to start accumulating it now. And what you're going to see here is a system that can put in place the right-of-way today. One of the most important things, get right-of-way, do utility relocations, and build a foundation for a rail system down Route 1. And you've got to do that. There's a systematic way to do this, and what they're showing us is something that will improve the lives of people on Route 1 now as we move forward, but also set the course for what Route 1 is going to look like 15, 20, 25, 30 years from now. And so I hope you'll enjoy the presentation. I too want to thank the folks who have been involved in this. This has been a first-rate job, and the hardest work is ahead of us, which is for us now to get this thing implemented. So thank you all for your energy.
Thank you, Supervisor. There we go. Thank you so much. All right, so we have a full presentation for you all this evening, so I'm not going to spend any more time talking. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jason Mumford, who will lead us through the presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, and I'm excited to be able to share in digest version some of the main points of the work that we've done on the technical side, and certainly leave time for you to express your questions and comments to us, because we're really still looking to receive, as Tim mentioned, your important feedback now and moving forward. Hopefully you all had many of you have had a chance to look at the display boards. We're going to try to be brief in our summary of the work and review where we've been to date, and really land on this evaluation of the alternatives and what that leads us to in terms of the implementation and the different considerations around really moving to the next steps of implementing the recommendations for a multimodal transportation system in the Route 1 corridor. So quickly, the purpose of the study. The study is unique in that it really tries to address the major forms of surface transportation in this corridor. It's not just a transit study. It's not just a study that looks at bicycle and pedestrian connections. It doesn't just look at automobile travel and traffic. It looks at all of those in a unified way and makes a recommendation that would advance those combined modes of transportation over time for a real tangible benefit. So we've looked at needs. We've diagnosed the needs in the corridor. Certainly with a lot of input from you, we looked at the need for a competitive, attractive transit service. We saw the need for safer and more accessible pedestrian and bike facilities. We saw certainly traffic is on our minds every time we talk with people in the community, every time we experience the corridor ourselves. And then overlaying all of this is really the need and the plan for development, economic development that is healthy and that makes the community a better place over time. And so from those needs, we've developed goals that speak directly to those needs, and then related to each of those goals, the project team has established the criteria by which we compare the alternatives toward a recommendation. We've been listening. We've had 3 public meetings. Just about exactly a year ago, we had the first public meeting here. We had one in the interim, and we're back here to really communicate these findings and the draft recommendation. We've tried to be very open in as many ways of reaching you as we could through the internet, through flyers, being on the corridor in person, and we appreciate your efforts too to communicate with your neighbors and each other. We've tried to assemble all of the things we've heard from public, from technical staff, from county participants, and boil those things into a coherent message and really inflect and understand the findings through those lenses. A quick overview. I know it's hard to read this. This just summarizes the technical tasks that we've been up to during the last year. We find ourselves here at this October-November point where we have a recommendation coming that would be adopted by the county governments as a preferred alternative for implementation. And this is a representation of this screening process where we start with a large range of alternatives. We apply our goals and our evaluation criteria to winnow that large set of options down to the most realistic and then the recommended alternative. So we looked at this evaluation and this yields the following recommendations. First, from the bicycle and pedestrian standpoint and from the vehicular traffic standpoint, we came up with the technical recommendation that for traffic, the right solution for the Route 1 corridor is a 6-lane facility. It's already a 6-lane highway in many places, to fill in those areas where it's not 6 lanes, so it's a consistent 6 lanes throughout this 15-mile segment. And then to complement that with a continuous network of pedestrian and bike facilities, a wide pathway that could be used by bikes and pedestrians in areas where there's going to be lots of retail and lots of activity, that it's possible to separate bikes from the pedestrians so that they have their own independent ways. But we've really been strong on this recommendation for a continuous pathway for walkers and bikers that doesn't yet exist. And it's being implemented in pieces already. And that's one note that as many people that we've talked to before, why is this taking a long time? Well, there's already many improvements that are ongoing at the county level. This tries to stand back from that and establish that master plan that's going to be implemented in a coherent way that these little improvements are already a part of. The alternatives. We looked at 4 alternatives for transit, and each one of these 4 alternatives also includes those highway and bicycle pedestrian elements, but these are different. So the first alternative is a bus rapid transit project that extends that full 15 miles, the northern part in dedicated lanes on the curb side of Route 1. The southern portion would be in mixed traffic. We looked at that alternative very closely. Alternative 2 is a bus rapid transit that is oriented in the center lanes, in the median lanes of Route 1 for the majority of the corridor, all the way from Huntington to the Occoquan River, mixed traffic in the southernmost portion into Prince William County. Alternative 3 is a bus rapid transit alternative. Thank you. Is the light rail alternative, which extends the 15 miles from Huntington to Woodbridge. And alternative 4 is a hybrid of a bus rapid transit alternative with a metro rail extension at the northernmost segment. The bus rapid transit portion is the same as that alternative 2 that we've just shown you. The difference here would be that in the future that could be a yellow line extension for the northern 3 miles of the corridor. These are key indicators. These are the key statistics that we'd like you to walk through with us. Cost and ridership and cost per rider. These are the things that we're going to look at among many other technical considerations. But you can tell by looking at this that as you go from left to right across this table, that the alternatives have higher ridership, and that higher ridership tends to also correlate with a higher cost. because those rail alternatives tend to be a higher cost. They have more infrastructure, more complicated infrastructure associated with them. So there's this correlation from left to right. Also on the operating and maintenance costs, we looked at those costs. And then this number here is an indicator for comparing the alternatives. Cost per rider, annualized capital cost, and it's a way of comparing the alternatives again. Again, we see that pattern stepping higher as you go to that higher amenity, higher quality transit investment. We looked at these alternatives, we applied our goals and our objectives to these alternatives, and we looked at all these measures of effectiveness. Here are a few examples. And the resulting table averages, and we have a finding. We have a comparison across many measures of these 4 alternatives, and the 2 that came out as the best are the alternative 2 and the alternative 4. And they came out as best for different reasons. Alternative 2 was a more cost-effective alternative that could be implemented more quickly and efficiently. Alternative 4 has a higher ridership. It has a higher potential to attract the kind of economic development that's planned for, especially in the northern part of the corridor. So they're good for different reasons. How do we interpret these findings? Well, the recommendation that we're putting before you as a draft recommendation is that implement both. Implement alternative 2 in the near term. Get going right away to develop a median running bus rapid transit project in the corridor, and plan for a future metro rail extension in the north end. And we're going to spend the rest of the presentation talking about some of the nuts and bolts of getting from here to there, because there's a lot of things to do toward implementing these recommendations. So first, we just wanted to place some images in front of you. This is an artist's rendering of what a bus rapid transit facility and the surrounding development could look like in the Hybla Valley area. You can see the median lanes, you can see a station and you can see the 3 lanes on either side. This is a higher level of development with the same bus rapid transit facility. You can notice over here that there's a potential metro rail station there in that Hybla Valley area. My colleague Meredith Judy is going to take a minute to walk us through some of the land use and growth considerations.
One of the key considerations, as Jason has said, is the land use on the corridor. And one of the ideas that you all are very familiar with is as population and employment grows, it creates an opportunity for us to shape future development associated with that population and employment growth to support different types of transportation. So shaping that development to support potentially easy walking accessibility, biking, access to public transportation, and of course also traveling by automobile. We have some good examples in this area of places that have shaped their population and employment growth to support access to public transportation and walking, and creating those making those modes safe and accessible. One of those is the Roslyn-Ballston corridor in Arlington. And another one that's emerging today, and you may all have seen recently, is the Metroway corridor on Route 1, north of Old Town in Alexandria. And you can see that they have built the first phase of a dedicated bus rapid transit system in a median. And what's growing up around it is development that is walkable, so you can walk to the transit station. It's higher density, but there aren't as many jobs and housing units as on the Roslyn-Ballston corridor, but it still has a high quality transit mode. And to compare that with one of the visualizations we have for the Route 1 corridor, this is the Woodlawn area on Route 1, and it shows a similar level of density to what's occurring on Route 1 in Alexandria on the Metroway corridor. So some of the things you'll note here are the median running bus rapid transit in the middle of Route 1, some open space, and a mixture of uses and a street network in here that allows people to walk to transit, to shopping, to their houses, to a variety of destinations. We've carefully considered land use on this corridor, and we've used it as a way to understand what kind of transit modes we could support over time on the Route 1 corridor. And we've looked at a number of land use scenarios. This graphic gives you a chance to start, it provides a framework for how I'm going to display to you the scenarios that we've created. This first, you'll see that there's a range of activity levels shown on the left bar here, and these are existing Metro rail stations. And you can see that there's a pretty wide range of activity levels that we see at Metro stations around the region. This purple bar shows the Roslyn-Ballston corridor and the activity levels that we see there. And so that's what we have up here. You'll see that line again in the next slide. And then we have a bar here of the activity levels that are associated with a BR, bus rapid transit or light rail transit investment. And this is actually an average for the Norfolk Light Rail in Virginia and the bus rapid transit that's planned in Richmond. So what I'm going to show you here is a series of slides that show these different scenarios that we've looked at that have informed our evaluation and understanding of the alternatives on the Route 1 corridor. On the bottom here, each of the proposed station locations, and we've looked at a half mile around each of these stations. The green bars show what the development that exists today. So the amount of activity, the amount of population and employment around the stations today. This next blue bar shows the projected 2035 projections. So what the county expects to see in these areas regardless. That is the growth that's projected by 2035. This light blue allows you to compare with what is shown in the comprehensive plan. So the adopted plan that the county has for the amount of growth that is allowed in these station areas. And you can see that some of those are already above this BRT, LRT sort of average that we have for Virginia, and beginning to approach that sort of halfway towards the Roslyn-Ballston corridor average. And again, you can compare those with this range of density levels on the left side. The next is an additional increment of growth above what's projected that we could associate that could occur as a result of a transit investment. So additional population and employment that could come to the area due to a high quality transit investment. That's the red bar. And then purple is our final scenario where we looked at, well, what's that additional growth that we would likely need to see in order to to support a Metro rail on the north end and then bus rapid transit for the full length of the corridor. And then we've created some visualizations to begin to understand, okay, well, what does all of that mean? This is the Beacon Hill area. So up here in the corner is just a photograph of the shopping centers that you're all familiar with in Beacon. And then this is an overlay of what the area could look like. And it just has some of the features that we've been talking about, some of the mix of uses, higher activity levels, certainly, pedestrian accessibility to the stations and throughout the area, and then some park uses. And then we, again, overlaid sort of that population and employment density associated with perhaps a Metro rail type investment on the corridor with the same features. Now, a slightly lower intensity area, this is the Woodbridge area, the end of the corridor that we're doing for this study. And you can see it contains a lot of the same features. Just keep pressing the wrong button. It contains a new park and ride, as you would often see at the end of a high quality transit investment corridor, and then higher mixed use development, accessibility across Route 1. So these are some of the visualizations to begin to understand what's being proposed.
So when we presented all of this material to date to our technical review team and to our officials, they said, okay, this is all fine, but now do more homework. We want you to tell us some other connotations of these growth levels, and we want you to tell us how we can implement the recommendations. So the growth levels have some connection, as some of our officials said already tonight, with other public infrastructure that we need to consider if this growth that Meredith talked about is going to happen in a way to maintain and create a better sense of place in this corridor. So growth is going to happen in all of these scenarios, as you saw, and we're going to be focused in the implementation phase on working with the comprehensive plans that really shape the way development patterns move forward. And those comprehensive plans need to include consideration of streets, schools, parks, public safety, utilities, all of these elements that are part of the ongoing growth of the community. And we point out, as you saw, that the metro rail levels of investment or growth require more of that public infrastructure than the bus rapid transit elements. And so we're gonna talk about one of these technical areas, which is streets. What is the traffic implication of some of these growth scenarios? So first we looked at that already projected growth level, and we looked at how does the proposed transit system operate with that ongoing traffic growth that you experience. We did a lot of modeling work. We're showing that with the transit, that predictably the transit travel time goes down. And one of the things that you notice in this graph is that there's a little bit more automobile travel time because we're giving a better priority to the transit service. But actually, the transit time is better than the auto, or about on the par with what the auto travel time used to be. So we're creating a competitive environment for transit that really will attract more passengers and let more people ride that transit service. Looking at the other growth scenarios, our charge was to look at what level of street infrastructure investment would need to accompany those growth levels. And clearly the finding is that beyond that recommended 6 lanes for the Route 1 facility proper, it would be prudent to begin planning a network of connected local streets that could begin to give people alternative pathways for their short trips driving, better pedestrian connections. And so this analysis shows that for that scenario 2, you need at least another 2-lane continuous street to parallel Route 1 to be able to accommodate the travel demand. And if you're looking at that higher growth scenario, you need more infrastructure still. And so this is just a glimpse at the planning that's going to need to accompany implementation of this centerpiece recommendation along Route 1. These diagrams kind of illustrate the issue with this parallel street network. I really like these diagrams because they illustrate sort of our daily travel pattern. And on Route 1, as a good example, we have our residential areas. We need to go out onto Route 1, make a left turn to get to the shopping area, park. It's really not that far. And if we had a better shortcut to walk or bike or even drive, we wouldn't have to make that left turn that makes for more traffic delays. And so that's just a glimpse at what restructuring over time can do. Now, we want to spend a moment toward this phasing and funding. Many of you stopped at the display boards that map out how to get from here to there through time. The first phases that we're recommending for implementation are at the northern end of the corridor, a phase 1 project between Huntington and Haiva Valley that includes all of the multimodal elements, the street improvements, the bike improvements, pedestrian, as well as those transit improvements. And the combination of phase 1 and 2 takes you between Huntington and Fort Belvoir. A third phase would extend that corridor of bus rapid transit investment all the way to the south end in Woodbridge, and the fourth phase would be that Metro Rail extension longer term in the north end. Now, putting these all together, we see that this is a coherent plan for implementation. And again, it's a somewhat simplistic plan. We're standing back from an understanding that there are lots of improvements ongoing in the corridor, and this phasing plan takes those into account and does it in an organized fashion. It maps to the roadway widening projects that are already committed to in the county and the state funding programs. And we've done work as well on how the funding mix of these different projects and different phases could play out. And we've come up with these diagrams to just show you a glimpse of some of that funding work that we've done. For the transit projects particularly, that northern phase, the phase 1 and 2 work between Fort Belvoir and Huntington is a set of projects that really could be competitive for a federal transit grant. That's a big deal because as you can tell, these are heavy capital projects, and it helps a whole lot if the federal partner can pay half of that, leaving smaller chunks, still significant chunks for the local and state governments to cover. The southern segment at first analysis is less competitive for those federal funds, but could be more competitive over time as it's attached to this higher frequency transit project in the north end. In the longer term, this yellow line extension could also be competitive for federal funding. And that would be heavily contingent on how successful we are in the early phases at making some of these big changes, attracting a strong level of transit ridership, attracting and shaping the kind of walkable development and communities that would then attract more population and more jobs. That then leads to a much more competitive chance to have this high capital extension of Metro Rail, make that possible. We also wanted to show you some of our homework results from the phasing part of this. One of the most common comments that we get is, why can't we do this sooner? And I, as much as anybody else, is restless for getting these things done. I was almost surprised when I saw, I worked for many years on that Metroway project in Alexandria, and I was almost surprised to see that it's actually in the ground and operational. We do so much work planning. It's so exciting to see these things happen. They take time, and we try to map out the realistic planning, engineering, land acquisition phases, and this is of course attached to the major capital investment portions. This is not attached to service improvements that can happen in the meantime, smaller capital investments that the counties are making in the meantime, but these major capital pieces, we're saying that a 10-year phase for, if you start now, by the way, we need to start now to make sure that we can get to that phase 1 and phase 2 within the next 10 to 12 years. And these light blue bars represent the planning work that's going on in parallel. Those reassessments of what the comprehensive plans call for, what they allow, and the public services and infrastructure that those are also including. We show this purple set of diagrams, which is the federal funding process. That's an overlay on this phasing chart, and we're mindful of this moment at which we can demonstrate due diligence to the Federal Transit Administration and say we're ready to put our hat in the ring as a potential project. And so that lines up with this, could line up with this next phase of activity in project development, which is the environmental documentation phase and preliminary engineering phase. We've put all these action steps together, and these turquoise bars at the top represent the steps that we would take to implement the bus rapid transit portion, getting started soon on the environmental and continued engineering work, but just at the same time and just as important is identifying those comprehensive plan changes that would be necessary to support that other centerpiece, as I call it, investment in transportation. The dark blue bars represent the steps necessary to advance that Metro Rail portion. And again, it's starting now. It's starting now to understand what kinds of growth in economic development is necessary to support that kind of investment, understanding how that plan for economic development can be reflected in the comprehensive plans. And so starting now toward these eventual opening years is really important. That's the message we're trying to drive home, that even these steps now are very important. They're on the critical path, as we say, toward achieving the ultimate recommendation. So at this point, I think we want to open it for comment.
Thank you, Jason. It's a lot of information, right? But as Jason mentioned, it does take a long time for these projects to develop over time, but the key is to keep them under development, keep them going, keep the process moving from where we are now with the planning into the environmental, into the design and engineering, etc. We have the Broad Street Bus Rapid Transit that was mentioned here earlier that's been under development for the last 5 years. And there was an opportunity to seek federal funding through the recent TIGER program through the U.S. Department of Transportation. And we were in a position because we had completed the environmental and we had gone through all of the processes to make that project ready. So when that TIGER program came out, we were right there and we submitted our application and we got $24.9 million. We were the third largest project to get funded in the country. Okay, that was a $600 million program. They had $9.2 or $9.6 billion worth of applications. So that just goes to show the value of making sure that you have your projects continuing. And it's very important from a transit perspective that we continue that. So just keep that in mind. The time frame is, as Jason mentioned, it is tied to funding, it is tied to some other things. There isn't anything that we can't, possibly make it sooner. But again, it's all tied with funding, and it's all tied with advancing the projects. So with that, why don't we open it up for questions and comments, and just be glad to take any questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Stephen Keat. Two questions, both based on real-world situations. I used to live on Fort Hunt Road. There was a bus that went directly in front of my house, and if I took that bus to get to the Huntington Metro, it took all of 5 minutes to get there. So it was ideal for going in, and I could get the bus in a very speedy way. However, when I would be coming back in the evening, unless I came back in certain very specific time periods, when I got off the Metro, I would have to wait anywhere from between half an hour to 45 minutes to get a bus to go that short distance. So I went and I ended up driving to Huntington and parking there as a result of that. So the first question is, how would you deal with that sort of problem? The second is, I now live down near Little Hunting Creek, and today when I was coming here, I timed my drive from the creek to, I got to Route 1, and it was 1.4 miles. Okay, so with what you're planning to set up now, how will I, other than driving, how will I get from my house to the Route 1 corridor and get fed into all of this that you're proposing? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. That has a lot to do with the local feeder bus service. So as this project as it advances, and Fairfax County takes it through its project development and planning phases, they'll look at possibly rerouting and having local bus service to feed into the Route 1 bus rapid transit, and eventually Metro Rail into the future. So those would be some ways that, that the Fairfax County Connector would be able to address that situation. Any other questions related to the project? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Robin Kelly. If the Metro was going to be extended from Huntington, which route would it go? Would it go down, say, North Kings Highway, or would it veer over right to Route 1? I'm just wondering about that.
It'll come along.
Oh, sure. Yes, the route that we've shown for all of these alternatives takes North Kings Highway down to Route 1 and then continues within the right-of-way of Route 1 south.
So what would happen to the, what would happen to like the little townhouses that were along? Would some of them have to go? No? Because, North Kings Highway is just 4 lanes, I guess. But they would have room. Oh, okay, I don't know.
No, in our preliminary analysis of bus rapid transit in dedicated lanes along North Kings Highway suggests that the impacts, there would be property acquisitions to make sure there's a dedicated lane, but when I say acquisitions, that's land and not the degree that would necessarily impact anybody's home. It would be an incremental widening to achieve a dedicated lane. The future project underground would of course be underground, but along that same pathway.
Yeah, and again, this is very conceptual at this point. So the next phase would be design and engineering, and of course they'll be getting into a lot more detail in terms of right-of-way and doing the environmental work. We had a question over here, this gentleman back here, and then we'll get to you.
Biggs Barnes. I've got two comments. One, we seem to be thinking two-dimensional level platform. We should be thinking, I've talked to Michelle and Jason, we should be thinking overpasses and underpasses like you see at Franconia and other places like that, where an overpass at Tully Gate would bypass a couple of lights. It's about 100-foot drop, 134 to 27, and that would be a perfect location for moving a lot more traffic south. The other one is right there at Costco, at where Mount Vernon Highway comes in. There's two stoplights. Everything gets clogged up there, and an overpass there would be great. Yes, some underpass at Kings Highway or whatever. Michelle's written them back there on the form. Then my second comment is monorail out of Las Vegas has been extremely successful, a lot lower cost, and they're talking about extending it out to the airport. They've got 7.5 miles, which is to Fort Belvoir. So I'm a proponent as a civil engineer and a monorail society that monorail might be a better solution above the roadway. That's a third dimension, okay? And that would either follow the medians or the side of the road. So the monorail would be very supportive. Out of Las Vegas, it is automated, so there's no human that's driving the trains.
Thank you.
So that was
appreciate your
it. I've got
comments.
some slides out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate your comments. We have a gentleman right here.
Larry Heffman. Arlington has had real-world experience with what you're talking about. What has been the tax increment effect of the tremendous amount of development along the Wilson Boulevard corridor, which basically started out as a Route 1, vacant lots, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the actual numbers are in terms of their. Do you want to take this one, Mary? You have some numbers?
I don't have numbers. I mean, it's taken.
Yeah, we've studied the corridor, and I'm not going to repeat the economic numbers of it. It's a corridor that's studied over and over again. What we have noted is that in parallel with investment in transit and in parallel with good planning around thinking about local streets, thinking about development levels that step down appropriately from higher densities to lower densities, that the growth has been attracted to that corridor from other places in the county, and that growth has been steady.
From other places or an increment of growth. I don't think it came from other places.
I think that's a better way to say it, not from, but I'm trying to say that it preserved communities as they are in other parts of the county, but it was able to attract growth that would happen elsewhere in the region to places that are walkable and places that people want to live and shop, etc.
Well, the point is, you're talking about money.
Yes.
This creates a flood of property taxes without any increment in the rate.
That's correct. And we do have an understanding of that there would be an increment in terms of in terms of the tax revenues that would potentially occur. But again, that all depends on the planning and the comprehensive plan and how well we can attract that type of redevelopment activity to the Route 1 corridor. So that'll be a lot of the work that Fairfax County staff will be doing over the coming years to really allow that for for that growth to
Doesn't
occur.
sound like you've taken this into account at all in your financing assumptions.
Actually, we have, but we actually have.
It's not what it's sounding like.
Okay. Well, we have taken it into consideration, and we do understand what it will generate. But again, it's going to depend on the level of redevelopment activity that the county addresses and allows for in the comprehensive plan. So, thank you for that. It's a great comment, and we do understand what you're driving at. I don't know who had their hand up first. We'll go with this lady here in the red.
Are you planning on putting in some infrastructure for charging so we can have electric buses running up and down the rapid lane in the center?
Electric buses. We haven't talked about the actual vehicle technology. Do you want to address that? I mean, it's an interesting idea. Yeah. I think that's something that could be taken into consideration as we move forward with the project, but we really didn't get into the specifications of the actual vehicle. And again, that's something that Fairfax County would want to consider as they advance the project. This lady right here. Sorry, Meredith.
Hi. My question is also about funding, but funding the next steps. I'm not even going to touch the 50% from the feds, okay? I'm just going to stick with Fairfax County and the Board of Supervisors as well as Richmond, okay? What are our biggest project competitors in Fairfax County that could shut down possible funding options on a county level? And how supportive is our governor in Richmond, as well as, and I think, Scott, you're the only one who's here left because everybody else abandoned you. But how are the folks in Richmond supporting this effort? You know, I won't even go because there's so many other factors on a federal level, but let's talk local and statewide for funding the next steps.
Okay. Well, I mean, we're funding, right now the Commonwealth's funding this phase of the study. So that was from the previous administration. So we've been very supportive of that. We are very supportive of advancing public transportation in the Commonwealth. We've been very supportive in both Arlington and Alexandria, as well as Richmond, Virginia, as well as Virginia Beach recently. So I think this governor, and I heard him speak this morning about economic development and redevelopment. He's very keen on that, and I think this would fall in line with some of the thoughts and ideas that he has. I'll turn it over to Leonard to allow him to talk to the Fairfax County piece of things.
Well, it's very true. There are a lot of competing transportation needs. It's a big county. This is an important part of it, but there are a lot of competing transportation needs. And if you look in January of this year, because of the new state funding, a lot of projects are moving forward. And in January of this year, our board approved what's called the 6-year transportation priorities. There's over 200 projects that they funded. Some projects are in phases, but the funding is from fiscal 2015 through fiscal 2020. So it's 6 years. It's on our website at Fairfax County .gov, Department of Transportation, 6-year transportation priorities. You'll see the 200 competing priorities. There is money for projects in Route 1, some of those 200. There's also a set aside for transit improvements. So we could move this to the next, we could move this project, if there's a decision to move this project forward, we could move it to the environmental stage. Even though that's expensive, it's relatively inexpensive compared to constructing major projects. So the bulk of, from the county's perspective, the bulk of the money is spoken for through 2020. But after that, it's sort of a greenfield, it's open. So if this, moves forward, there is money, after 2020, the board could allocate, substantial money for construction for the recommendations here, if the recommendations are adopted. Hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think that, oops. Oh, yes.
Yeah, thanks. They didn't have the slide up here, but there was a slide in some of the other presentations we were looking at where they were looking at how the $2.4 billion might be broken down over time. And my recollection is the biggest chunk of that was state money from DRPT. It was about, at least in terms of the numbers you were talking about, it was about $670 million from DRP transit funding. I think the next biggest chunk was NVTA money. And that's the tax increase Delegate Sickles talked about that we just passed, the special money from the sales tax that's going into the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, I think the authority, not the MVTC, the MVTA. And that's about $300 million a year that's going in there. I was concerned that only $270 million over 25 years. I thought we ought to get a much bigger chunk of that into here. And then after that, they had county money in there and some VDOT money. But I think we need to get more money from NVTA. I think we need to get the feds to step up to the plate, not just the Federal Transit Administration. We need to get Fort Belvoir to the table, because I think Fort Belvoir plays a big role in what's going on around here in terms of our traffic growth, our transit growth, and our job growth. And they just helped. I know Chris is shaking his head, but we just funded, the feds just helped with $180 million to fund that widening through Route 1. And I think, you know, they could come to the plate with some of those stations that are necessary. And so I think there's money out there. We just need to work together, as I think Supervisor McKay mentioned, with all levels of government, to try and figure out ways we can maximize funding to get this thing sped up and funded. As Leonard pointed out, in the transportation world, they tend to work on 6-year time frames, because you got to have that kind of time frame to fund a project, just because the money gets planned out, and between the engineering and everything you have to do, you have to have at least a 6-year time frame. So, you know, after 6 years right now, we're wide open, and I think we can do it. But, and Terry McAuliffe is very supportive of transit. The state comes up with more and more transit money every single year. The last transportation bill put a lot more state transit money on the table. And so I think it's mainly going to be state, local, and federal. Just the mixes and where exactly what pot it comes out of is the big question. We got to get to the head of the list, and we do that with all this planning we're doing.
Thank you, Delegate Strong. Yes, sir. The gentleman in the back in the gray t-shirt.
Hi, I'm Josh Grimwright. First of all, thank you very much for all the work you've done. I think this is a really good plan. However, I'd be really disappointed if I left here today and didn't express the disappointment I have in the timeline. What can we do to help you accelerate that timeline? Because we want the development, we're willing to pay for it, we want to make this happen faster. Make it clear to all the elected officials, we want you to do this. We want to make this happen. We want you to go to Richmond. We want you to look for bonds. We want to make this happen, not in 12 years for the first thing to happen, but how can we get to 8? Thank you.
Okay. And I think those are very good questions to be asking. And Leonard, if you have any comments that you'd like to make from the Fairfax County perspective.
I mean, it's great. One thing we do want to do is, you know, a lot of times in transportation we promise things in a timeline, and because these projects do take time, we don't meet them. So we looked at this pretty carefully, and we actually consider this pretty aggressive to get done under the system we operate on. If we were in China, we would, you know, do it in a year.
Thank you, Leonard, and this lady right here.
Hi, I'm Joanna Garcia. With the answer to his question, there should have been an answer that said, oh yeah, we've picked this part and this part and this part we can do together, or some kind of comprehensive plan to make it happen quicker if we have the funding. So I think that's something that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we should have that plan already in place, that when somebody says this is taking too long, well, we have the plan already in place.
And we do have the phasing in place, so it does come down to money. And the time, I mean, there is time associated with doing the environmental work, with doing acquisition, right-of-way acquisition. So there is time that even money can't speed that up, per se. So there are processes in place. And there's the fundamental decision on whether there will be federal funding included in this, whether we go through the FTA New Start, Small Starts process, which takes its own time. So, you know, when you take all of those things into account, unfortunately, it just takes time. That doesn't mean if there wasn't additional money that became available, like the Tiger money, for instance. We were able to be successful in that. Nobody would have thought that the Richmond BRT would be advancing and opening in 2016. I tell you, I started the project. Nobody would have believed that. A couple weeks ago, we had Secretary Fox in Richmond with Governor McAuliffe saying, you've got the money, go build it. So I think you're right that we need to keep projects like this moving and in the pipeline so that when those opportunities do become available, we're there to get it. So I think we have shown the phasing. We do think that this is appropriate in terms of what's going to have to happen with the comprehensive plan to allow for the metro. All of those things can begin now. Fairfax County and the Board of Supervisors will be taking that under consideration. These are local decisions. I think that's important to note, that the next steps, and I think the lady asked, what's the immediate next step? Well, we're having our public meeting tonight. We're going to have an executive steering committee at the end of this month where Delegate Servell, his colleagues, and others will be receiving our final recommendation. This is a draft recommendation right now. We'll ask them to, if they choose, they so wish, to approve that via resolution. That will be then taken to the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors and Prince William County Board of Supervisors. At that point, it's their decision to advance the project. So Leonard and others in Fairfax County will be the ones to shepherd that forward. So we've been doing this planning from the Commonwealth in partnership with them, but these again are local decisions. So, but it's a good problem to have, right? Everybody wants it, and that's a great thing. And they're going to need your support going forward as they're doing their comprehensive plan updates and as they're doing the planning and making the hard decisions that are going to have to be made to allow for this project to advance. They're going to need each and every one of you out here giving them the support.
Excuse me, he's been waiting for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
And I'd like to have a question.
My name is Frank Cohn. I noticed that phase 3, the planning doesn't start till a number of years back. It seems to me that some sort of planning ought to be initiated immediately to assure that whatever development is done in the phase 3 area will not violate what you have in mind. So if no planning is done for these number of years, you're taking a big chance, it seems to me.
And Leonard, do you want to take this, address the comprehensive plan?
Yes, we have planning folks in the room.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll take. I mean, I think we'll take that into consideration, and I think we'll
take that into consideration and think about how that can be addressed.
So again, those are conversations that are going to happen with the Board of Supervisors. But through our executive steering committee that we just held, there was a good discussion about how the comprehensive plan would be addressed for the metro extension and the timing of that. So I don't think there's any decisions that have been made. I think there's good discussion and deliberation on how best to advance the comprehensive plan to allow for the development, redevelopment to occur. So I don't think there's been any hard and fast decisions made at this point. But your point is very well taken. Might as well plan for the future from the beginning, right? Yep. Okay. Who else? This lady.
Good evening. I have two questions. My name is Cheryl Whitty. Regarding the proposed alternatives, I'd like to know how number 2 and 3 would impact senior citizens and the disabled, because sometimes the bus drivers have to make use of a lift to pick up and drop off the disabled individuals.
So, and again, the design will take those things into consideration as they start to look at platforms, as they start to look at median. But certainly we would anticipate that they would most likely be level boarding, and they would be ADA compatible in terms of being able to access the stations.
My second question is, my observation is that in order for me personally to make an informed decision about this proposed plan, I question the analysis of what may be compromised, an analysis of
and policies. But certainly affordable housing policies are have been put into place in Arlington for the Columbia Pike streetcar and elsewhere. So there are good models, I think, to be followed. But again, those are local decisions. Leonard, did you have anything to add to that? Is that okay?
That's okay.
Is that okay? All right. Sure. Okay. Who had their hand up? I know you've been asking for a minute. Yep.
Hi, yes, my name is James Owens. Question about phase 3 and phase 4 and their interplay. I noticed that in phase 3, there seems to be sort of a hole in the sources of funding right now. There's kind of a question mark as to how the funding would be reached. Does that have any impact on, if funding doesn't appear for phase 3, does that have any impact on phase 4 as either a planning matter or a funding matter?
Yes, if there isn't funding available, it would be difficult to advance the project, but that goes for any of the phases, right? So funding is key to keep the projects moving, but yeah, I mean, funding definitely has to be programmed to the projects to allow them to continue to advance. Yes, yes, sir, in the back. Meredith, if you can.
I am curious if the project team visited other metropolitan areas in the country or elsewhere in the world to examine best practices in situations such as we face. And I'm curious if the team based the plan here that we see on what they have seen, or if there's any place we can visit to see how what is planned here is already at work.
I would say there are a couple of responses to that. One of the responses is that this is a problem that a lot of places across the country, especially, are dealing with. And you don't have to go too far. You can cross one jurisdiction line and go to Rockville Pike in Maryland, and they're grappling with pretty similar issues around how to deal with a very important arterial highway that wants to become a community of, or a row of communities, of walkable places, and they're dealing with some of these same questions around transit and developing a grid of streets. The other example that people cite all the time is the Arlington example, and in around the Columbia Pike streetcar, they actually, before anybody said the word streetcar, Arlington County and Fairfax County, by the way, have considered these community issues around a grid of streets, around the proper width of street that would be safe for pedestrians and bicyclists, and still carry traffic. And so we have some really leading examples right here in this region that I think will be mirrored in other places across the country as different communities are struggling with these same issues of how to convert suburban places into places that are more walkable.
Okay, good, Jason. And we have several hands that have been up back here. Sorry, we have.
Thank you. Martin Tillett, the Springbank community, which is the north end of the corridor. And again, we appreciate that there's a plan, that there's something that's put together, and appreciate the remarks from the other supervisors saying this one wouldn't sit on the shelf. We're familiar with lots of plans that sit on shelves. Some of those affecting my neighborhood. And I also, the gentleman up here that was speaking about the Metro line that's in Arlington, I think he makes a very good point. That's a project with the Metro that brings revenue back. That helps implement a lot of those plans that are sitting on the shelf that we hear can't be done because the county can't afford to do it. And we feel something like Metro, I mean, I like the plan, we just feel your sequencing is wrong. We feel Metro should be first priority. we're seeing Metro as a game changer. It brings the kind of development and the intensity of development that brings in the revenue that would help pay for things that we've been waiting for so long. That we're just waiting. They've been talking about Metro since 1965, when the Mount Vernon Council of Civic Associations was formed. Your time scale, 75 years to get Metro, not even all the way down, just to Hyde Valley. We appreciate your effort, we appreciate what you're doing, but you've got the horses on the wrong side of the cart. We need to have something that puts Metro first, then deal with the others. It'll help pay for the others. You're talking about the funding. Metro will bring the revenue in. Thank you.
That's good. And those are the kinds of comments that we need to hear. And we're here to talk about the project and phasing and all of that. So we appreciate that. Meredith, we have several that haven't spoken right here, so yes.
Thank you. Been very informative, relative newbie to the area, so was excited to hear about this when I saw some emails about it, and a little depressed with the timescale. But a question that relates to the Metro again, and it's this: it appears, because of funding issues and economic realities, that the solution being sort of steered toward is to do it with put in the BRT first, and then hopefully in 2040 maybe have a Metro. So let's just assume by some miracle that we have a functioning BRT in place by 2025. Let's assume reality sets in and we have it by 2030. This plan is saying 10 years later, we're going to rip up a good chunk of the BRT that we put in and replace that with a Metro. That to me, a novice, relatively new to the process, my first meeting, that seems not prudent.
Yeah, we're not proposing that. Actually, what we are proposing is, am I better? Okay, sorry. What we are proposing is to have the median running BRT, but to maintain that. Okay, so and the Metro Rail will be tunneled because it's going to come out of the Huntington, and it's going to come into the, I guess there's like a, I don't know if I would want to call it, there's kind of a hill there, it's going to tunnel through that and come out, okay, into Hagler Valley. So the surface running BRT will continue, and it will probably still have the BRT service running it because there will be a few stations that aren't served by the Metro that will be served by BRT. Okay, so it's going to stay in place, and it'll evolve to be more of a circulator, but it would still allow for that local street level at-grade bus service to happen. Meredith, you pick, because you're back there, you know.
Just one question relative to the Metro extension. Are there any plans to have discussions with Watma relative to the express yellow service? I do take the Metro to work to Crystal City on a daily basis, and in the morning it's great, but in the afternoon it's very frustrating to have 3 trains, 2 of which are Yellow Line Expresses going to Springfield when I could have been on a train on my way home.
Right.
So just wanted to make that comment and inquire as to whether you had any discussions there.
Yeah, it's a core capacity issue. I could have Allison step up here. I'm not going to put her on the spot.
Thank
but
you.
Unless, okay. But we do you want to?
Well, I mean, so, Amy just mentioned core capacity, and so I'm Allison, I work for Metro, and one of our kind of focal points for the next, out to 2025, is getting to full 8-car train, which is the longest number of cars we can get along the platform. And so you no longer have to deal with the 6 versus 8 question of what's showing up. And also one of the other elements of that is essentially bringing the Blue Line service back to where it was before the Silver Line opened. So some of that will start to help you with your,
see you around the corner there. Yeah, so that'll start to look at that, but in the meantime, until that happens, we just have, we cannot get more trains through the system that's out there. So because the blue, orange, and silver are sharing and the blue and yellow are sharing, there's just no more track to put more trains out there. Does that make sense?
It does. I wasn't necessarily looking for more longer cars would help, but just the frequency. I mean, commonly there are 2 trains back to back to Springfield. More recently, I'm seeing 3.
Okay.
And that's the frustrating part. So.
All right, we can take that off.
And I guess what Allison is mentioning is really key to this time frame, because there is the core capacity issues that the WMATA and Metro are experiencing. So they have a plan right now called Momentum. It's a $6 billion needs for the core capacity issues. I think they have $75 million right now as a down payment. That's out to 2025, okay? So we've said we're not gonna even try to do anything because they can't. Metro simply cannot extend their system anymore until the core capacity issues are addressed. So that's part of the issue with the Metro extension timeframe and why it's not gonna happen just right now, okay? So we do wanna make improvements through BRT in the near term and to start to help and get the land use in the right, in the right state to allow for the Metro extension. If the Momentum does not get funded, the $6 billion does not get funded by 2025, then it's going to just continue to extend out the Metro extension timeframe, because they can't extend. So, and if I said anything wrong, say.
No, you're good.
Okay. So I think that puts some context that maybe we really didn't bring out in our discussion, because we have discussed it at length when we've looked at the schedule and the time frame for the Metro. So I understand the frustration, I really do, but you know, it's just a tough situation that they're in. It's a good situation and a tough situation because everybody wants it. So that's good.
So my question is about the projections, projections of the economic and population projections, which I imagine would vary a lot depending on the mode that you put in. So I've always heard that development, when you put down track, that it's very different what happens with development than if you don't. Essentially, developers don't trust government. So when you put down track, they're like, okay, there's the track, and that really makes a more dramatic difference than if you do, BRT or even a lesser thing than that. So I wondered how you adjust for that. I don't know how you predict developers, but how you adjust for that in your projections, BRT versus Metro.
That's a great question, and it's something we grappled with a lot as a study team. And this is, again, where we looked to places across the country that have made similar investments. We looked to surveys that have been done in this region of the development community, and they identified this increment that we've shown here in the red bars. The increment between dark blue and red is that 15 to 25% that these developers said that's the number of units or the number of floors more that they would add to their projects. Increment between what they would do with regular bus service to what they would do with a permanent investment, light rail or bus rapid transit. Now that's not a Metro Rail increment, but and then that Metro Rail increment varies. We've shown this variety here, and that survey wasn't explicit around Metro versus.
You don't have the information for if you did a Metro, where those lines go. And that's fine. You just don't have the calculation made. If it's a Metro versus BRT, which is obviously different.
Yeah, we understand the question. We didn't ask a specific survey question on that point. We certainly see the range, and we'll point to the purple bars represent that range between sort of this range of the red bar versus this purple bar. That's the range at which the development community would tend to respond based on the other places in this region.
So that's good. I like the purple one.
But that also takes a little time. So that's.
Let me say one other thing. I had a breakfast with some of the biggest landowners on Route 1 to try and gauge their interest in this. And you know, the big parcels on Route 1 are all on this side of the road. You have Beacon Mall, which is I think over 40 acres. You have Mount Vernon Plaza. There's the Audubon Estates Trailer Park. There's the place in between. And with the big commercial Federal Realty Trust, who owns Mount Vernon Plaza, and BF Saul, who owns Beacon Mall now, what they say is that it takes them about 10 or 15 years to get their leases in a place where they can deal with this. Because they tend to, like a commercial tenant, a big anchor tenant has a 20-year lease. It takes that long to get a store like Home Depot or Lowe's or Safeway profitable. And so for them to get their leases under control to the point where they have stuff in their leases where they can push people out or push them into new spaces that they build, they have to have a long time frame to do that. And so if they see that this is where we're going and that this is going to happen and that there's plans in the books and that it's coming, then they will start to take the steps to get their tenants in place, to be moved around, and they will start to do their planning and start to do those kinds of things. And for those big parcels, to me, those are the keys, is to get those big landowners focused on this and taking the steps to make it happen. I mean, I heard them saying things like, you know, Beacon Mall is something like almost double the size of the Shirlington Town Center. I mean, Mount Vernon Plaza is the size of like Pentagon Row. I mean, you know, these are really big projects that could result in, or big land parcels that could be really large town centers to sort of anchor these kinds of things. And so, but they have to see a signal that's 10, 15 years away that it's going to happen for them to start taking actions, and then things I think bud and build and spill off of that, and then you start seeing parcel consolidations and other things as you get closer in. So that's the kind of time frames you have to work on.
Okay, we have time for just maybe, let's say, two more questions. This lady here, and I know we haven't.
It comes back to cost again, and I'm just trying to understand that slide you showed about the cost, because the initial cost is the implementation cost, I guess, and then I'm just trying to understand how you get to the per person cost, because implementation ends at a certain point, and if it doesn't include like operation and maintenance, I just don't, what's the time frame of people? Like, is it a year's worth of people or 10 years worth of people for the cost? I just don't get it.
I think you're asking for a little more explanation of these numbers, if I'm correct.
surprised that it's $10 more per person when you could put so many more people in the cars and you have so much more development. I'm just trying to understand how it costs so much more.
Why these costs are so much more than these?
Yeah, I mean, I get that you don't have to pay the
Because
infrastructure.
automobile drivers are paying
You
for
get
the
all
left
this
hand.
development, if you also try to incorporate the revenues and the things that it spurs, you know, I
Yes.
mean, it might balance it out
Yes.
more, so it's kind of skewed right now towards.
Yes. No, and I think you make a good point. You said it's kind of skewed right now, and I want to just take that for a second, because it is kind of skewed because we've compared these alternatives on a level playing field, and you could call that playing field skewed depending on how you look at it. But we've taken the view that the federal grantor would take, which is you compare alternatives based on the regional adopted growth forecast. So we haven't done these numbers based on the purple bars in that last graph. We've done all these numbers based on the dark blue bars in that graph. And so, yes, they don't reflect what you pointed out, the tendency of this larger, higher investment to attract greater growth. We're not allowed to do that in our comparison. We wanted to come to you with this very level playing field and then let you draw those inferences and say, well, as a policy, we want to take this route, but we wanted to show you the comparison. And yes, we've done some numbers that do show, and that's why we ventured that, even though this number looks pretty bad, like this number needs to be $10 for the project to be a federal competitive project. This is the full 15 miles also. So if you make that a shorter segment and you account for greater population and employment levels, as we've shown we've entered that 50% federal funding pie in the out year because the numbers started to indicate that you would have supportive ridership, you could have population and employment growth if these investments follow a pattern. So I hope that wasn't too complicated, but I think you make a really good point.
And what time period? Is that a year's worth of people or?
Yeah, this number is based on 1 year of riders, and it's 1 year of operating costs, and it's the depreciation or annualized capital added into that too. So it's capital plus operating divided by the number of yearly riders.
Minus fares?
There hasn't been a fair calculation as part of that.
Okay.
Okay, we have time for one more because it's 8 o'clock and we're ending at 8, so we'll take one more question. Meredith, you pick. This somebody over here had their hand up a minute ago.
Hi, I just have a question about small business development. You mentioned the fact that it takes the larger parcel owners and the bigger businesses a longer time to spin up because, their enterprise, it just takes them, it's like steering a battleship. It takes them a while to get turned around. And it's good that we're engaged with them, but I think it would be prudent to make an effort to draw small businesses in to maybe fill the gap and accelerate the development rather than exclusively rely on these larger businesses. Is there any, effort to or thought put into a small business development plan along this corridor to accelerate the economic development while we're waiting for the larger businesses to, steer their battleships in the right direction?
Do you want to, are you wanting to, you have to tell
Is Edith here or is he? Edith Keller is probably the one to answer that, but I mean, the Southeast Fairfax Development Corporation, that's exactly what they're geared toward, is trying to encourage development on the corridor.
Well,
And
if you want, I can say something.
yeah, why don't you say Edith would be best on that.
Hello. Small business is one of our focuses, and we do business roundtables and all sorts of things to help and attract and grow the small businesses. But in terms of this kind of growth, even if you had, in terms of financing, for example, an office building, if you had someone who wanted to build, like the Beacon of Groveton office building, they need, in order to get financing, they need a single user who's going to take all or a significant part of that building. They can't be signing up 50 small tenants to get financing. It's just the way it works. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So if you had a large tenant who was going to come in and take 75% of the building, then we could fill that in with the smaller tenants. But at the moment, we don't have those small tenants. Fairfax County has a huge amount of vacant office space right now that's out there going begging. And we don't have a whole lot of office space here in the Route 1 corridor in the first place. So maybe some of this will help us get there and help the small businesses along the way. But to get the small businesses in order to do it is a little out of order, unfortunately. Did that help? Okay.
All right. Well, that's really good. And I'm glad that we're ending on that note with a community, with someone who's really involved in this community, because that's what's going to really mean and be very meaningful in the end. Everyone, thank you all so much for your dedication. We have the survey. Please fill it out, leave it on the desk at the front, and have a safe journey home. Thank you very much.